The 2026/27 season is doing something the Premier League has never seen before. 9 out of 20 clubs are starting the new campaign with a completely different manager. In other words, almost half the league is basically saying, alright, let's start over.
Should United fans be looking forward to this season?
I hope so, yeah. I hope so. I mean, we are.
So this video isn't just a rundown of 20 football clubs, it's a rundown of 20 gambles, 20 stories, and at least a couple of dramas juicy enough for you to tell your buddies about over a few beers. Arsenal. After 22 years, the Gunners are officially reigning champions. That alone caused an explosion of new Arsenal fans. Seriously, I've never seen this many Arsenal fans online before. I still remember watching the Champions League final at a bar, and the place was packed with Arsenal supporters. But to understand why this title means so much, you have to go back 2 seasons. Across 2022-23 and 2023-24, Arsenal led the table for most of the campaign, only to run out of steam right at the business end. Like clockwork, every April the internet would flood with fresh Arsenal collapse memes. Then came 2024-25 and 2025-26, and this time Arsenal didn't fall apart because of nerves. They fell apart because half the squad was in the treatment room. The 2024-25 season opened with Ødegaard's ankle injury, kicking off 2 seasons of him battling one issue after another. By 2025-26, in just the second match of the season, both Ødegaard and Saka were forced off in the first half. Havertz, Gabriel Jesus and Madueke all picked up injuries soon after. Across those 2 seasons combined, Arsenal suffered a staggering 93 separate injuries, and still won the title in 25-26. To be fair though, even with all the injuries, the squad depth was genuinely strong. There always seemed to be a solid backup ready to slot into pretty much any position. The man behind it all is Mikel Arteta, now the longest serving manager currently in the Premier League. In 2025-26, he also took Arsenal to the Champions League final, only to lose to PSG after a penalty shootout that was impressively bad. So this season, the Gunners are carrying double pressure, defending their Premier League crown while also craving revenge in Europe. On the squad front, Arsenal didn't go on a spending spree this summer, just around £190 million to patch the specific gaps that needed patching. If there's one thing missing, it's Saliba, who's out with a back injury. But overall, the squad still looks pretty balanced, with a capable option in nearly every position. Despite winning the league, Arsenal weren't exactly a goal-scoring machine, just 71 goals all season. The likely explanation? They leaned a little too hard on their set-piece dark magic, with 35% of their goals coming from dead ball situations. But with a defence-first approach, a squad full of players built like tanks, a rock-solid back line, and corner after corner delivered like a penalty kick, it's clearly working. Still, given how unstable most of their rivals look right now, nearly every team changed managers and is going through a reset, Arsenal are undoubtedly still the #1 favourite for the title this season. Though they just won the Community Shield, so the jinx meter might be running a little hot already. Aston Villa. Perhaps the biggest change for Aston Villa fans this season is that Villa Park will only have 3/4 of its stands open, as the stadium undergoes construction on a new north stand ahead of Euro 2028. So if you're watching a match with a loved one, and suddenly a brick falls in the middle of the pitch, now you know why. Internally, manager Unai Emery is staying put, and to understand just how important the Spanish coach is to this club, remember that he led Aston Villa to a Europa League title. A genuinely remarkable achievement considering that just 6 years ago, Villa were fighting relegation. Now they're a Champions League club and reigning Europa League champions, a status plenty of richer clubs would love to have. Villa's one real downside is they're still operating under tight spending restrictions, sitting right on the edge of breaching financial fair play rules, which has forced them to sell a lot of players and offload assets just to stay compliant with European football's financial regulations. But Villa fans shouldn't feel too down. They still managed to bring in the wonder kid Garnacho, so there's still hope for another top 4 push. Still, under Emery's guidance, and given their run in the most recent Champions League campaign, Villa promise to be a team well worth watching this season. Bournemouth. For 3 straight seasons, Iraola turned Bournemouth from a just survived relegation side into the most entertaining attacking team in the league, earning their first ever European qualification. And then, he just left, straight to Liverpool. Bournemouth are basically a startup that spent years training up a star employee, only for a bigger competitor to poach them, forcing them to bring in Marco Rosa to start the retraining process all over again. This is their first ever Europa League campaign, a parting gift in a way from Iraola. At least Marco Rosa also comes from the pressing school of football, so Bournemouth's identity probably won't fade away completely. Brentford. The Premier League's Moneyball club, no superstars, just spreadsheets and an incredibly sharp eye for talent. Last season they finished 9th, the club's best ever result, narrowly missing out on Europe in the final match days. Fun fact about Brentford's manager Keith Andrews. He was previously the club's set-piece coach, before being promoted directly to the top job from within. Very on-brand for Brentford's self-sufficient philosophy. Though, to be fair, when you're a smaller club without much money, that's really your only option. Brighton. If the Premier League had an official academy that reliably sells off its stars every single year, it would be Brighton. The selling side of that equation is still elite, but the buying side has genuinely been in question for the past year or two. Late in 2024, Brighton shocked everyone by cutting most of their scouting department, shifting almost all recruitment decisions to Tony Bloom's secretive data model. The result over the past season or two, the money keeps flowing in, but the squad keeps getting criticised for feeling unbalanced. The 2025-26 season was the clearest proof of that yet. Early on, young manager Hertzler's results looked solid, but by February, the club had hit rock bottom in form. Just when it seemed hopeless, Hertzler suddenly switched things up, bringing in seasoned veterans like Pascal Gross and James Milner to steady the midfield, and pushing Jack Hinchelwood forward into a number 10 role. From there, Hinchelwood exploded, becoming one of the most talked about names of the season's final stretch. Brighton finished 8th, securing their second ever European qualification, but the overall reaction from pundits and fans alike wasn't really celebration. More a feeling of, we barely escaped that one. Brighton are still the best-selling club in the league. The only question now isn't who gets sold next, but will the replacement actually be good enough that the club doesn't have to wait until February to save the whole season again? Chelsea. As a Chelsea fan myself, I'll be honest, I don't really enjoy talking about the club I love right now. If any club deserves to stand up and lecture the entire league on please stop firing managers like you change your socks, it's Chelsea, a club that just appointed its 6th permanent manager since Bluecoat took over back in 2022. Everything was actually pretty stable under Enzo Maresca, aside from a rough stretch near the end, and let's not forget, he did win the Conference League and the Club World Cup for Chelsea just a couple of years back. Then, out of nowhere, he left on January 1st, 2026, right in the middle of the season, only to resurface half a year later as the new manager of Manchester City, replacing Pep Guardiola himself. There are rumours that Maresca only ever saw Chelsea as a stepping stone, with his real long-term target always being City, waiting for the moment Guardiola eventually left. If that story's true, it's easy to see why some Chelsea fan pages started calling him Snake Maresca 2.0. In the middle of all this chaos, Chelsea somehow managed to burn through 3 managers in 4 months. Maresca, then Callum McFarlane, then Liam Rosignol, then back to McFarlane again. A merry-go-round so fast that even the club's own media team probably needed a cheat sheet to remember who was actually in charge. Now, Chelsea have finally landed Xabi Alonso, a manager whose playing career might honestly outshine a few of his current substitutes. Since last season's chaos and instability cost them a spot in European competition this year, Chelsea can, for once, fully focus on the Premier League, something most of their fellow Big Six rivals, aside from Tottenham, don't get to do. As for the first-team squad, not much has changed. Still the youngest squad in the league, the most multicultural, and, for once, a mercifully manageable fixture list. The only real question left is whether the club's manager-churning culture will finally give Alonso the time he needs. Coventry City. 25 years away from the Premier League, and Coventry return under none other than Frank Lampard, a Chelsea legend, now leading a small-town club onto the same pitches as the giants he once battled against as a player. It's a rare underdog-makes-good story in a league otherwise obsessed with money drama. You might ask, how do you know they're the poor one here? Well, at the time of writing, their total squad value sits at just £273 million. Crystal Palace. Palace just went through the most successful stretch in their history, winning the FA Cup in 2025, then the Conference League in 2026, and manager Oliver Glasner's reward for all that, getting pushed out by the club shortly after. The official, tidy explanation is that Glasner was simply burned out after a long stretch of pressure and wanted a new challenge. But from what I followed, it really seems to come down to the club's owners having zero ambition. Back in October 2025, Glasner insisted his potential exit had nothing to do with transfer disagreements.
I told him in October, so it's nothing to do with the transfer window.
But once the club sold off both Eze and Guehi, he came out and said the owners had abandoned the project.
Look at the bench, just kids there in our attack. And I said before, we feel that we are being abandoned completely. Selling our captain one day before a game. Completely no understanding for this. We're preparing, and then yesterday at 10:30 I get told that our captain will be sold. So why not next week, that we can play at least this game?
Glasner is now in charge at Nottingham Forest, while Palace brought in Pierre Sage, a manager who took Lyon to the Europa League as an interim boss, then moved to Lens and won the Coupe de France, plus a Champions League spot in a single season. Honestly, a pretty surprising resume. Palace should probably be fine this season, as long as the club doesn't sell off all their promising young talent and drive another manager to walk away in frustration. Everton. If you asked a neutral fan what they know about Everton, the most common answer would probably be they're the only club never to have dropped out of England's top flight since the Premier League began. And honestly, even before the Premier League existed. That's 72 consecutive top flight seasons, a record not even Liverpool or Arsenal can match. Even after being docked points for financial fair play breaches in recent years, they still never went down. Genuinely spooky stuff. And after all those seasons of survival, in 2025-26, they officially moved into a new home, Hill Dickinson Stadium, transforming Everton from one of the league's most old-school grounds into one of England's most modern stadiums in a single summer. In that first season at the new ground, there was actually a stretch where Everton were genuinely in the mix for European qualification, Conference or Europa League level, but still. Then, after the March international break, they went 7 straight matches without a single win, scraping together just 3 points out of a possible 21. The man behind all of it is none other than Sir David Moyes, the very manager who once led Everton into the Champions League 2 decades ago. He's now in his second spell at the club, after a tour that included spells at West Ham in London, Real Sociedad in Spain, and the infamous post-Ferguson job at Manchester United, widely considered the roughest chapter of his career. For Everton this season, the question isn't really whether the squad has enough quality, it's whether they can actually hold on to form for all 38 matches, instead of collapsing right when the finish line is in sight, leaving Pickford to carry the team on his back once again. Fulham. Alvaro Arbeloa, a right-back who won the Champions League twice with Real Madrid, teammate of Ronaldo during the peak Galacticos era, is now taking on his first ever head coaching job, and it's happening right here in the Premier League, the same league where he once played for Liverpool nearly 2 decades ago. From playing alongside Xabi Alonso, he'll now go head-to-head against him in his very first match. Real Madrid's former interim boss facing off with the club's former assistant. It's basically an internal Real Madrid Clásico, imported straight into the Premier League. Hull City. 10 years without top-flight football, and Hull City return with a manager that 99% of viewers have never heard of. Sergej Jakirovic, a coach who won a league title in Bosnia, a domestic cup with Dinamo Zagreb in Croatia, before drifting over to Turkey and finally landing in England. In other words, Hull are betting on a coach who's travelled nearly half the map of European football just to make it to the top of England. If you're wondering whether this club is rich, nope, not really. Among the 3 promoted clubs this summer, Hull spent the least by far, and also have the lowest total squad value in the league. Ipswich Town. Ipswich are the perfect example of a yo-yo club, bouncing straight back down the season right after going up. But this time they're back in the Premier League and immediately lost the manager who got them promoted. Kieran McKenna, a name once rumoured for the Chelsea job years ago, left Ipswich shortly after completing the job of getting them back into the top flight, handing the reins to Gary O'Neill, a manager who's previously kept both Bournemouth and Wolves safely up. The club just finished climbing the stairs, only for their guide to walk off and find a different staircase entirely. Now Ipswich have to relearn the whole journey just to avoid getting kicked straight back down again. Of the 3 promoted clubs this season, Ipswich is really the only one that's shown any meaningful positive activity, though I don't think it'll be enough to keep them up. With 3 newly promoted teams this year, I have a feeling they might just end up going back down together, hand in hand. Leeds United. Honestly, when I think back on Leeds last season, what I remember most is them beating Chelsea twice, home and away, with that midfielder Stach playing brilliantly. The guy's got a really nasty free kick, plus that one hilarious TikTok. Beyond that, I mainly just know Leeds have a genuinely gorgeous kit and that they won the championship with 100 points, tied with Burnley but ahead on goal difference. Burnley, meanwhile, played way too poorly in the Premier League and got relegated straight back to the Championship, while Leeds, after a rocky start where they looked a bit out of sync, have settled in and secured survival. Given they're a club with solid financial backing, I think Leeds will stay up again this season, or maybe even become the surprise dark horse of the year. Liverpool. Right after Arne Slot's first title win, Liverpool spent roughly £450 million on the most expensive trio of the summer, Florian Wirtz, Alexander Isak and Hugo Ekitike. On paper, this was a dream squad built to defend the crown. In reality, it turned into a chain of injury misfortune and positional mismatches. Isak struggled with injuries, Ekitike was playing well before he too went down injured, and Wirtz never really found his best position all season. The end result, this hugely hyped trio only played together for a grand total of 119 minutes across the entire campaign. And it wasn't just the new signings struggling, the established core dropped off too. Salah, Van Dijk, McAllister, Konate and Gakpo all underperformed relative to their usual level, and at one point, Liverpool lost 9 out of 12 consecutive matches. The football on display was criticised as slow, one-dimensional and predictable, and Slot ultimately got the sack, despite still managing to finish inside the top 5. Bournemouth's Iraola was brought in to unlock what was already there but never properly used. Wirtz needs a system built around his creative instincts. Isak needs a setup that puts him in a genuine central striker role. Philosophically, Iraola is known for high pressing, quick transitions, and a proactive attacking mindset even against stronger opponents. Football with roots surprisingly close to Liverpool's identity in the Klopp glory years. In other words, this is essentially an experiment. Can the right man with the right philosophy finally wake up a squad that was already extremely talented but had been operating with the wrong settings for an entire season? That said, after last summer's massive spending spree, Liverpool were notably restrained in the 2026 transfer window. They lost 2 club legends, Salah and Andy Robertson, on free transfers, while Konate was bought outright by Real Madrid. The new additions were modest by comparison. A loan for Ronald Araujo, plus signings Victor Munoz and Jeremy Jacquet, names not yet proven enough to be considered real answers to the void left by Salah. Even Iraola himself has publicly admitted the squad still needs another winger.
We need to sign players, winger, for example. No, we definitely need to sign a winger.
So the question for Liverpool this season isn't just, can Iraola wake up Wirtz and Isak? It's whether a squad that looked incredibly strong on paper last year can finally be unlocked to genuinely compete for the title. If Iraola succeeds, it'll be rare proof that the small club that beats bigger teams philosophy can be scaled up to England's elite level. If he fails, it'll be a classic lesson that not every winning formula travels well with a mountain of cash behind it. Manchester City. To understand why a decade-long dynasty came to an end right in the summer of 2026, you have to rewind to the 19th minute of a 2-2 draw against Arsenal back in September 2024, the moment Rodri went down with a torn ACL. The bitter irony is that this was also the very season Rodri hit the peak of his individual career, and yet it marked the beginning of an unprecedented collapse for the team as a whole. Statistics show that without Rodri on the pitch, City averaged just 1.9 points per match, a huge drop from the 91-point tally that won them the title the season before. An entire system built around one player controlling the tempo suddenly lost its compass. The 2024-25 season that followed became Guardiola's worst at Etihad. City finished third, suffered a shock FA Cup final defeat to Crystal Palace, and were knocked out early from most cup competitions. In 2025-26, even with Rodri back, he kept picking up one injury after another, forcing Guardiola to manage his playing time extremely cautiously. Still, thanks to Guardiola's tactical brilliance and City's considerable financial firepower, results improved significantly. In 2025-26, they won both the FA Cup and Carabao Cup, though in the league they finished as runners-up with 78 points. And then, Guardiola announced he was leaving Etihad after a decade spent reshaping English football entirely. His replacement is no stranger, his own former pupil, Enzo Maresca, arriving just months after a turbulent exit from Chelsea. How this translates on the pitch remains to be seen. But even though City lost the Community Shield to Arsenal, which I'm fairly convinced was a deliberate case of dodging the curse, Chelsea reportedly issued a fairly sharp statement over Maresca walking out on his contract to join City. So on paper at least, City are winning this exchange so far. Winning for quite a while, actually, considering the club's ongoing case involving over 100 alleged financial rule breaches still hasn't produced a verdict after all these years. The pressure on Maresca isn't really about winning the title immediately, it's about not playing too much like Guardiola. If he does, every single below par result will get compared detail by detail to his old mentor. But he'll also need to play similarly enough to preserve an identity that's been drilled into this squad for an entire decade. And above all, he has to solve the exact core issue that destabilised City over the past 2 seasons. Building a system that isn't dangerously dependent on the fitness of a single individual, the way things fell apart around Rodri. Or, alternatively, he could just keep relying on one key individual again, assuming Elliot Anderson suddenly turns into a superstar. Manchester United. After years of post-Sir Alex Ferguson chaos, cycling through manager after manager, Manchester United are now betting on a familiar face, Michael Carrick. Carrick took over midway through last season, replacing Ruben Amorim right as the team was playing about as badly as possible. And yet, in that short stretch, Carrick guided United to a third-place finish, the club's best result in years. Impressive enough that the board handed him a full, permanent contract, doubling down on him for an entire season this time. But a strong half-season doesn't automatically mean United's years-long instability problem is solved. While the rest of the Big Six chased after Europe's hottest managerial names, United took the quieter road, bringing in someone with zero scandal history, zero drama attached. The question now isn't, can Carrick spark a short-term turnaround? It's whether that strong half-season was a genuine foundation or just a brief flash of light in Old Trafford's usual chaos. If it doesn't work out, Carrick risks getting labelled Ole 2.0, given he actually served as an assistant under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, back in the era of beat the weak teams, draw with the strong ones. Newcastle United. If any club perfectly sums up win a trophy, lose the squad, it's Newcastle. After winning the 2025 Carabao Cup and qualifying for the Champions League twice, Newcastle got absolutely gutted this summer. Isak had already left the season before. Now Tonali has moved to Tottenham, Gordon is gone, and captain Bruno Guimaraes was snatched away by Arsenal. And right in the middle of that selling spree, Eddie Howe walked away too, just days after a shocking 1-4 pre-season friendly loss to Bristol City. In other words, Howe didn't leave because he fell out of love with St James's Park. He left because he saw a season coming where the squad would keep getting drained while he had barely any say in reinforcements. His replacement is Matthias Jaisler, brought in right as the transfer market had basically run dry of quality options. Newcastle's three most notable signings this summer are all 18 to 20-year-olds, raw, unproven talents at the top level, rather than the kind of experienced reinforcements that could realistically replace what Isak, Tonali and Gordon left behind. So with a squad that's just lost a string of key players, a brand new manager with zero prior experience in Europe, and a batch of new signings still very much in their learning phase, Newcastle will likely have to get used to watching the European race from a distance this season. And it's not out of the question they could find themselves fighting a relegation battle nobody saw coming. Or maybe, come winter, they finally crack open the wallet and jump back into the race for Europe. Nottingham Forest. If you only judge by squad quality, nobody would have predicted Forest fighting for survival in 2025 to 26. They entered the season riding high, having finished 7th the year before and reaching Europe for the first time in 29 years. And yet everything collapsed after just 3 matches, when manager Nuno Espirito Santo was sacked following a very public war of words with chairman Evangelos Marinakis. And that was only the beginning. Ange Postecoglou, who had just ended Tottenham's trophy drought the season before, was brought in to replace him, only to get axed after just 39 days, one of the shortest managerial spells in Premier League history. Sean Dyche took over next, lasting only 114 days. Vitor Pereira became the club's 4th permanent manager in a single season, a record no other Premier League club in history has ever matched. In other words, Forest didn't struggle for lack of talent. They struggled because their owner has an extremely itchy trigger finger on the sack button. What's notable is that, in the middle of all that managerial chaos, the defensive backbone stayed remarkably consistent. Despite 4 different managers, the core of Matt Sells in goal, alongside Ola Aina, Murillo, Milenkovic and Nico Williams, shielded by defensive midfield duo Elliot Anderson and Sangare, remained almost entirely unchanged all season, and that's exactly what kept Forest from sliding even deeper into the relegation battle. The real turnaround came in the final stretch, when Pereira finally freed Morgan Gibbs-White completely, letting him roam ahead of the midfield with no restrictions. 9 goals in 10 matches from Gibbs-White down the stretch fueled a stunning late run that secured survival, closing out a season that, given the quality of the squad, really should have ended with a comfortable mid-table finish instead of a nail-biter down to the final matchday. This season, Forest are doing what they do best, sacking the old manager and bringing in a new one, Oliver Glasner. But he arrives right as Forest lose the true jewel of their midfield, Elliot Anderson, off to Manchester City. So Glasner's challenge this season isn't just avoid repeating last season's disaster, it's finding a replacement for the exact player who kept Forest's defence standing through every internal storm last season. And given the club's owner, known for being fairly hot-headed and stubborn, it's anyone's guess how Glasner is going to convince him to bring in fresh reinforcements. Sunderland. Sunderland are the most unbelievable fairy tale story in the Premier League over the past 2 seasons. Returning to the top flight after 8 years away, Sunderland spent big right out of the gate, bringing in quality signings like Granit Xhaka, Nordi Mukiele and Brian Brobby, turning the Stadium of Light into a genuine fortress that made Chelsea, Everton and especially Newcastle all suffer painful away day defeats. Under Régis Lebris, a French manager with no big name reputation whatsoever, Sunderland finished 7th, securing their first European qualification in 53 years. What's often overlooked is that, behind that impressive result, Sunderland were actually one of the lowest shot volume, lowest expected goals teams in the entire league. In other words, Sunderland won through disciplined defending and ruthlessly efficient finishing. The kind of football that naturally raises doubts about sustainability heading into a second season. And true to how these surprise story clubs usually go, This summer, Sunderland did the complete opposite of last year. Barely any spending, just a few small additions, since most of the budget was already spent last season. Manager Le Bris now faces the toughest challenge of his career, figuring out how to survive in the Premier League for the first time, while also juggling European competition for the first time. All while rival teams across the league have had a full season to study and prepare for the counter-attacking style that made Sunderland such a surprise. Tottenham Hotspur. If you had to pick one club capable of turning an entire season into a never-ending tragicomedy, no team fits the bill better than Tottenham, and their managerial saga in 2025-26 was more dramatic than anyone could have imagined. Just one season after Ange Postecoglou ended their 17-year trophy drought by winning the Europa League, Tottenham sacked him anyway, bringing in Thomas Frank. What looked like striking gold turned into the cruelest kind of Spursy heartbreak imaginable, leading PSG 2-0 in the European Super Cup, only to get pegged back and lose on penalties. From there, everything spiralled out of control. Frank won just 7 of 26 Premier League matches. The team dropped to 16th, just 5 points above the relegation zone. A 1-2 home defeat to Newcastle was the final straw, with the home crowd chanting "sacked in the morning," basically telling him to get lost. And sure enough, he did. Tottenham's board found themselves searching for their 6th manager in under 7 years and were desperate to land De Zerbi. But around mid-January, De Zerbi turned them down, unwilling to make another quick move. So Tottenham went with plan B, Igor Tudor, a manager with no prior Premier League experience, but known as a fireman, someone who had rescued a few clubs from relegation before. Except this time, the fire was too big. Tudor failed to win a single one of his 5 matches in charge and was sacked after just 44 days. Even once De Zerbi finally took over, the crisis wasn't over. In mid-April, following West Ham's 4-0 win over Wolves, Tottenham officially dropped into the bottom 3, the first time they'd been there since January 2009. It wasn't until the final stretch of the season that De Zerbi truly turned things around, helping Spurs survive in 17th place. Learning from that nightmare of a season, in the summer of 2026, Tottenham decided to go all in to make absolutely sure it never happens again. So, with a squad completely overhauled thanks to a mountain of spending, and under a widely respected manager, will it be enough to erase back-to-back 17th place finishes? Then again, plenty of recent big spending Premier League clubs still haven't gone on to win it all right away. So Spurs fans, take a breath. A top 4 finish would already be a great result. Missing out on the top 4 entirely is the only real disaster here.